Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Last week, I was in London at the World Travel Market, and I went to meet one of our suppliers there. And it's the supplier that we're using to do our K2 base camp trek with next year, Raza. And I thought Pakistan is not on everybody's radar as an adventure travel destination. And I thought it'd be really great today to get Raza on the podcast so we can have a little bit of a chat about Pakistan. So hi, Raza.
Oh, hi. Thank you for inviting me, Keith.
No problems at all. Now you're back in Pakistan. Now you're no longer in London. You've flown back.
I have, yes. Thank you. Yeah, it was not such a long flight, 6 hours, and I'm back. Yeah.
Perfect. So it's a really easy destination to get to then, really.
Yeah, there are direct flights, both from British Airways and Virgin Atlantic. They both fly to Pakistan, so it's pretty easy to get to.
And Pakistan is becoming a massively new adventure travel destination, I would say. Like it's building in popularity, isn't it?
Yes, so I would say that Pakistan has always been called the next great adventure destination, and for various reasons, primarily the war next door, it has kept the travelers away. But yes, it is. People have kind of see that Nepal is getting overrun with tourists, and Pakistan has so much more to offer. So yeah, there are a lot of tourists that are coming to Pakistan now. It's the tourism business is definitely growing here.
So tell us a bit about you then, Raza. How did you get into adventure tourism?
Well, so I grew up in Pakistan in the mountains, spent about more than 20 years in the US. In US, I live in Colorado, so always been into outdoors, hiking. And, whenever I come to Pakistan, I just felt that Pakistan had so much more to offer. It was such a sort of an underrated destination. And I think a few years ago, I have my partner that we've been sort of working together for a while. And a few years ago, it just seemed like Pakistan was at the right time where it could open up to the world. So I just kind of took that and developed the company. We've been in the business for about 15 years overall, but we've kind of started marketing ourselves to the foreign visitors, I think in the last 4 or 5 years. So that's kind of my background. I've led several tours on K2 Base Camp, including the one that we are offering for you. So I do that. I do some cultural tours as well. Generally a history buff, love to bike, hike, all those great things in the outdoors. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
So you put your hobbies and turn that into a business pretty much like I did really then. So it's all about how you can continue to do the things you love.
I think, that's the only reason people are in this business. It's if you're not into the hobbies, it's kind of a difficult thing to get into this business because it's not very exciting if you're just looking at the money. So yeah, it's definitely my hobbies.
And how cosmopolitan is Pakistan becoming as a country now? I mean, obviously you have the major cities, and then you're going out then into the wilderness, but it is quite cosmopolitan in the main cities, isn't it now?
Yeah, so I think this is this great misconception about Pakistan as being a very conservative country. I think 30% of the population is under 30. They're in the city, especially. They're highly educated. Everybody gets to see now on social media and YouTube and everything. So the young generation is very progressive. Even when we go into the mountains, I think that every community is different. There are some very conservative communities where, even if a 10-year girl sees a man, she's going to turn her head. But then there are other communities where women are completely integrated into the societies. They're running food kitchens. They have There's one women's group that has a furniture workshop and a carpet workshop. So they are completely integrated into the society. So I don't think that you can, it's a very diverse country in terms of culture and views of how people live their lives. So it's hard to paint the whole country with a brush and say, well, they're all the same. They're very, very different. And I think that's one thing that people really enjoy about Pakistan is that they get to experience all these different culture and communities as they go through the country.
And I think, I always look at a country, and if the major hotel brands are moving into that country, you can tell that they're expecting tourism to pick up, can't you?
Yes, that's right. So I think that we are about maybe 2 years away from that. They've moved in the sense that they've started to build. There's I think a French company that's even building a ski resort now. So, but they're all in the building process. It's kind of a nice time to get in before everybody else does. But everybody is coming into this area because the government itself is promoting tourism quite heavily now.
And I think Nims with his 14 peaks in the Netflix documentary has really helped Pakistan in people understanding that the Himalayas go into Pakistan, and Pakistan actually has some big mountains in it. Most people think of Nepal, but many people probably didn't think that until they watched that documentary, how stunning Pakistan actually was in the mountains.
Yes, so actually, 3 of the highest mountain ranges are in Pakistan, including the Himalayas, the Karakoram, and the Hindu Kush. Nanga Parbat is the highest Himalayan peak in Pakistan, but the Karakoram is a mountain range which is about 200 square miles, overall in length, compared to the Himalayas, which is about, I think, 1,400 miles long. So in those 200 square kilometers, there are about 5,000 peaks above 5,000 meters. So it's it's the highest concentration of high peaks in the world. It's really, when you take the flight that goes from Islamabad to Skardu, one of my friends told me that it's the best commercial flight that you can possibly take because the views are just incredible. You have a huge Nanga Parbat on one side and a whole range of Karakoram mountains, high peaks on the other side.
So we decided for our first trek with you then that we were going to do the K2 base camp trek. We, as a company at the Bucket List Company, we sell a lot of Everest base camp treks. We do a lot of Kilimanjaro treks, and we wanted something different. And how would you say the K2 base camp trek is different to an Everest base camp trek?
Oh, yeah, it's completely different. So first of all, Everest is base camp. As you go to the Everest base camp, you're walking through a nice track. You stay in nice lodges or like village huts. K2 base camp is completely self-supported. So on the second day of the trek, you are on the glacier. And when we start the trek, essentially we have all the porters, tents, food, everything. It's the whole sort of trek is a self-contained unit. So we are walking on the glacier through a corridor of peaks, sort of uncounted 6,000 meter and above peaks on both sides. And every day you camp, you wake up and by the time you camp, you can see another beautiful high peaks in front of you. So there are Trango Towers, you go to Mashabrum, and then you go to further to Concordia, and then all of a sudden you can see Gashabrum 1 and 2 in front of you, and then as you go further, you can see K2 itself along with Broad Peak. So it's a very, very incredible mountain scenery, humbling in a way, I would say.
And I suppose the key thing to that is it's not commercialized, is it? Like the Everest base camp trek is a very commercial trek. There's bakeries, there's coffee shops. You're not getting any of that on
it's actually, and it will never be commercialized in that sense because we right now don't have enough tourists to even have fixed campsites. So the entire camp is moving, and I think it's kind of like a sweet spot in terms of timings that I think in a couple of years we probably will have fixed campsites. But right now, because it's a glacier, so we will there are not enough volume of tourists coming in. So the entire campsite is kind of self-contained unit as you move from one to the other, and it's completely non-commercial. Yeah.
And how many people would you say did the K2 base camp trek on a yearly basis? How many tourists trek it, do you think?
Well, I would say, I mean, if you include the expeditions, I mean, now last year, you remember there were about 80 people who summited K2, which was like a record. It has never ever been done before. And that has brought in a lot of expeditions coming in. And then we have the trekking people as well. So I would say, like if it's probably not more than 500. It's just like not a lot really.
Yeah. When you put that to the 40,000 people who are trekking to Everest Base Camp every year, then you're kind of, and that's kind of, one thing that I really love is the fact that, if you're into adventure travel, you always probably know somebody that has been to Everest Base Camp or they've climbed Kilimanjaro. But, there's very few people that I know that have been to K2 Base Camp.
I guess so. Yeah.
Like in terms of,
I know a lot of people who been to K2 Base Camp.
You probably would do, but in the UK, like if you went to a pub in the UK, you probably find there would be somebody in the pub that had been to base camp or they've been to Kilimanjaro. But I bet there's very few people that you'd stand there in a pub and have a conversation with someone that's been to K2 base camp.
Yes, and I think it's a completely different experience than being on either of those mountains. I think one of my clients last year, she had been to Kilimanjaro base camp, and I think on the third day she said, "Well, this is already way harder than Kilimanjaro was." So it's a challenge because it is a glacier. The glacier kind of shifts every year, so. I think by the time our treks come in, we've figured out what the path this year is going to be. Sometimes it actually takes a little bit longer because the glacier expands or the path changes. And that's kind of like the whole adventure of being in K2.
And what would you say the highlights then were of a K2 base camp trek?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat that?
The highlights. What would you say the highlights were of a K2?
Yeah. So I would say the campsites, the Urdukas campsite is right across from Trango Towers. This is like there's a cathedral tower, and then behind it is these really epic towers called Trangos, and some of the high, the most complex climbs are done on these mountains, and they're beautiful. So every campsite has its own sort of unique thing. I think the next one is a Goro 2, where you see Mashabrum. Mashabrum is like just under 8,000 meter peak. It's a beautiful peak, and then you come to Concordia. Concordia is where all the glaciers come together. On one side, you can see K2 Broad Peak. In front of you, you can see Gasherbrum 1 and 2. So the Gasherbrum 1 and 2 are right in front of Gasherbrum 3 and 4, which are the 8,000 meter peaks. But you see these, and on one side, you see Chogolisa, and they're all, you kind of like are surrounded completely by these really high peaks. And one of the highlights of this trip that we do something which is different is that we actually go and spend the night at K2 Base Camp. Which is so typically people stay at Concordia. The trek to K2 Base Camp is quite long, and coming back takes maybe a little bit more than 8-9 hours. So we actually go spend the night at K2 Base Camp, and I think that's a little bit special compared to what other people do.
Yeah, I think that was one of the highlights that I put down to our trek, was the fact that you did get to spend the night at K2 Base Camp, where most other trek companies, like you say, don't do that. And I think, that's a real highlight from it. And in terms of trekking distance, what would you say the trekking distance was each day in kilometers then, whilst they're on the trek?
Well, it's about I would say about 15 to 16 kilometers. It takes every day takes about, I would say there's about 6 hours of trekking. and it may not seem a lot, but you are walking. So the glacier is completely covered with gravel, and it's a little bit unstable that you're walking. And then the first couple of days, it seems okay. But by the time you come to Concordia, all of a sudden you're tired because it's just like, every day kind of adds up. Yeah, it's about 15 kilometers. I wouldn't say that any day is particularly hard. It just gets a little tiring as you get to the altitude. And yeah.
What's the altitude profile like for the trek in terms of daily gains within altitude then?
It's about somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 feet. So that'll be about like 300,
400 meters.
Yeah.
And when we were in London and we were chatting last week, you've just devised a new trek as well, which was super interesting. I mean, the K2 base camp trek is quite a long trek anyway. And this one's slightly longer. And is it 24 days?
Yes, it's about 24 days. So there are 14 peaks above 8,000 meters. 5 of those are in Pakistan. And in Pakistan, they're actually located quite close to each other, which is why Ningam Sherpa was actually able to he came to Pakistan, it was like done in a few months, like, in a month or so, and then moved on back to Nepal. So we do Nanga Parbat base camp. That's kind of like an acclimatization hike, if you will. The base camp is at about, it's like 11,000 something, which is it's about 3,500 meters. And then we start the same trek that we do for K2 base camp. So when you're going to K2 base camp, on the way is Broad Peak base camp. And then when you come back, so instead of coming back all the way, you continue on the other side. And Gashabrum 1 and 2, they actually share a base camp. So you can be at 5 of those 14 base camps within a 24-day period. And I think that's a very exciting trek. I think that's going to be one of the things that people who want to do something to add to their bucket list will be quite excited about.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think, especially after seeing 14 peaks and things like that, to say that you've been to 5 of the base camps of those is, again, very few people will have done it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, all the stuff we've talked about so far has been kind of like really long multi-day treks. But what is there for people who maybe want to come and explore Pakistan, but don't want to spend day after day trekking? What is there in Pakistan that they can do?
Yeah, so this is a great thing about Pakistan is that because of this concentration of high peaks, there's so many valleys, and every valley kind of has its own flavor of what you can possibly explore. So I think that one of my favorites is that we combine Nanga Parbat and Rakaposhi. So Nanga Parbat is, I think, the 9th highest peak. Rakaposhi is the 19th highest peak. But in terms of profile from base camp to the peak, I think Rakaposhi is the highest. The great thing about both these base camps is that they are very, very accessible. So you can actually reach both of these base camps in about, like, Nanga Parbat is a 2-day hike. Rakaposhi is another 2-day hike. And after that, you can actually come back to a city like Hunza and explore the Hunza Valley and the culture. We also have a tour which goes from a valley which is called Gizar Valley. It's a very unexplored valley, but it's a very interesting. Like, the trek starts from Yasin. Yasin is a town where people still haven't caught on to the whole YouTube and social media thing. So their favorite thing in the day is to play polo. And it's like any day of the week, it's quite common to actually watch people playing polo in the ground. And we go from there through villages. We cross this pass called a Thui pass. It's about 16,000 feet. So it's less than 5,000 meters, about 4,000 something meters. And we cross over into the other side, which is Chitral Valley. So in Chitral is on the Hindu Kush side. So we go to the Hindu Kush mountain, we go to Chitral, and then we end up in Kailash Valley, where there's this group of tribe called Kailash have existed for thousands of years. They were completely cut off from the rest of the world until about 17 years ago. So they actually practice their own religion and language, and we go and we get to spend time with them, hike in those valleys. They have 3 villages, primary villages where they live, and have a completely different experience from when we start from Yasin, it's a different culture, different language. In Chitral, it's a different culture and language, and then we go to Kailash Valley, and then there they actually have their own religion and different language, completely different cultures. And I think that is something that for people who are not really into like a glacier, spending 2 weeks on the glacier would find very interesting in terms of a trek/culture experience.
And obviously, in terms of Pakistan as a country, like where would you generally fly into? Like, how long is it to get around the country? Like, what is the best way of getting around the country?
Right. So, I mean, from London, there are flights from Virgin Atlantic and British Airways. They fly into Islamabad and Lahore. Most of our treks or trips, they start from Islamabad. And we fly usually to Skardu. So, for example, for the K2 base camp trek, we will fly to Skardu. If we were to go on a trek like the Gizar Valley trek, that trek that I talked about, we will fly into Gilgit. These are direct flights. They're scheduled on a daily basis. So those are sort of the best way of getting into the northern areas of Pakistan. The best time to visit that area is in summer. So summer is very, very hot in Lahore. Lahore is, if somebody has been to Delhi, they can probably compare it. They're kind of like on the same plane. Most of our the people who come in, they fly into Islamabad, but people who are coming in, I would say spring or autumn, they fly into Lahore because culturally Lahore is very interesting. It's got a lot of history. It's the cultural capital of Pakistan. Very interesting food, lots of variety of experiences that you can have there.
And internal flight times, then how long are the internal flights to get around Pakistan?
Oh, the internal flight to northern areas from Skardu to Islamabad to Skardu flight, the flight time is about 30 minutes. The flight is about an hour, including, like takeoff, landing, boarding, all of that stuff. So they're very, very, it doesn't take long at all to get from one place to the other.
And how long do you think people need to have in Islamabad to have a proper look round and understand Islamabad then?
So I think I really like Islamabad as the first place where people come to, because it changes what you perceive Pakistan is. Because Islamabad is a planned city built in the 60s. It's very green. It's right next to mountains, and you expect coming into the country, expecting chaos and cars going everywhere, lots of crowds, and it's completely not like that. It's a very, very nice, beautiful city. So I think that staying in Islamabad for a day, but just right outside of Islamabad, there's the Texela UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's the salt mines. There's also a place where we take people to see truck art. And people, when they hear truck art, they don't quite know. But in Pakistan, it's a huge industry where the entire truck is taken apart, and then they paint it. They do metal carvings. There's even now like sticker art, that very beautiful sticker art that they do on the trucks. And these trucks are put together by like there's 7-8 artisans doing a completely different thing to bring one truck together. So we take people to see that. And then there's, of course, like the local heritage museum. There's lots of shopping and just interesting things that you would do in the city. as well. So yeah, at least a couple of days, I would say, but you can easily spend more.
And you started off this chat with the phrase of the neighboring war. And like
Yes.
one question, obviously, we get asked quite a bit is, is Pakistan safe?
Yeah. So yeah, it's actually the most common question that people don't want to ask because they don't know whether it's the right thing to ask. But yeah, so first of all, Pakistan, yes, Pakistan is safe. It was not safe for a very long time. But back in 2017, there was this terrible incident where the terrorists, Taliban, they came into a high school, and they killed over 100 children. And that kind of just completely shifted the whole mood in the country against the whole terrorism thing. And the army launched an operation. So the areas that are next to Afghanistan, they were evacuated for a period of about 3 years. There were about close to 300,000 people, more than 300,000 people who were evacuated from those areas. The army went in for a couple of years, and they eliminated the Taliban and many other terrorist groups who were there, because many of them had built these complicated places underneath the mountains and things like that. So, but since then, I think that if you look at 2015, I would say there was like some terrorist incident going on somewhere once a week kind of thing. And now there is nothing. It's that whole, yes, we still have political instability. We have, there's economic problems like the rest of the world, but I wouldn't say there's no safety issues that exist anymore. Which is kind of like one of the reasons why we said, well, it's the right time. It's the right time for people to come to Pakistan. And this is the right time because I think in a couple of years, a lot more people are going to be coming. So, yeah.
So you would say that's your advice then, that if you're thinking that Pakistan potentially is on your bucket list in one of the destinations that you want to go and visit, then if you want to go and see it in its true natural style, then go and do it sooner rather than later.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that even just the mountain expeditions, we used to have, like 4 or 5 expeditions for K2. Last year, the number of people who are coming has just mushroomed because the Sherpas have kind of employed the same methodology that they use on Everest. On K2, and they've been highly successful. So it's I think yes, it's the right time. I think in the next 2-3 years, those hotel chains that are arrived will have their hotels up, and they would want to fill them up. So I think this is the right time to come.
Perfect. And in terms of, you said the summer is the time to go trekking in Pakistan. So what are you talking? Kind of like July, August time?
Yeah, so June through September is the best time for trekking on the glacier because before that it's too cold, and after that is also too cold because when you're doing K2 base camp, even going to K2 base camp, once those, I think the first trek that goes through it is actually the one by the local guides who determine the path that everyone else is going to follow, and that's done in early June. But having said that, if you want to do other treks, so for example, the Nanga Parbat Base Camp trek or the Rakaposhi, they can be done in late May through early October, I would say.
And if you wanted to go out there, then potentially and see K2 Base Camp in action, when would be the best time to go for that?
I think that the best time, the best time would be, I think, middle of June through end of August.
Yeah.
Well, end of August, the expeditions are gone. So I would say middle of June through middle of August.
Yeah. Perfect. That's exactly when we're going in July next year. So there should be some action there. Well, Raja, thank you ever so much for coming on to the podcast today. It's been lovely to chat with you again. And I think, if you're looking for somewhere really quiet to go and explore and not be amongst lots of people while you're trekking, then I think Pakistan is definitely somewhere you should check out as one of your next trekking destinations. It's like I say, it's always nice to hear about different places, and that's what we try and do on the podcast, and try and give you some inspiration of places that you would like to visit. We are gonna look at doing the 5 base camp trek as well, because I think in the future that'll be a really great one and a proper bucket list tick to get 5 base camps ticked off in one trek. But I will put details in the podcast notes about our K2 base camp trek, and we've still got a couple of spaces available on that one for July next year. So Raja, again, thank you ever so much. Hope everyone's enjoyed this podcast, and we'll speak to you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.